This is When Science Speaks, a new web series profiling innovative and interesting people working in science and technical fields, from academia to industry to the nonprofit world. We explore how to be a powerhouse advocate for science and your research, how to advance your career in meaningful ways that make you happy, and how to push back on the ongoing assault on science and other related issues of interest happening in the world.
Well, hey, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us on this episode of When Science Speaks. I'm Mark Bayer, and I want to let you know today's episode is brought to you by Bayer Strategic Consulting in Washington, D.C., which helps scientists and entrepreneurs get funding, gain influence, and build relationships with their most important stakeholders. It is so fantastic to have Dr. Nadine Bongaerts on the show today. Nadine is based in Paris and recently earned her Ph.D. in synthetic biology with a focus on accelerating drug discovery against tuberculosis. Nadine's professional passion is discovering the possibilities of engineering life at the smallest scale and designing cells with new functions. When conducting her PhD research, she focused on using genetic engineering to develop faster and more efficient drug screening methods to find new antibiotics against tuberculosis and understand the evolution of tuberculosis antibiotic resistance. Apart from her work in the lab, Nadine is actively bridging science with business and society. She's served in several leadership positions at Hello Tomorrow, which is a global nonprofit dedicated to transforming the way we eat, move, power, and run industries through activities that include scouting deep tech solutions around the world, building a collaborative ecosystem, providing innovative consulting services, and identifying and analyzing deep tech trends. Nadine is also co-founder of Science Matters, which is a communication and education agency for life sciences that supports science communication training for leading universities and research institutions and develops activities to engage stakeholders in scientific developments. She serves as global faculty member for synthetic biology at Singularity University. Nadine earned her PhD at Université Paris Descartes with highest honors, her master's in life sciences and technology from Delft University of Technology. Welcome to the show, Nadine. It's so wonderful to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, you excel in both navigating the complexities of synthetic biology and also communicating about them in engaging terms that are accessible to general audiences. How did you develop and sharpen this rare skill?
That's a nice question to start with. I believe this accidentally happened when I was 16 years old. And back then I was having my first real job during the weekends in a panini shop. But I quickly changed when my mother asked whether I could be a science tutor at her school for students who needed some extra help. And so I decided to take that opportunity and went for it. And in no time, I had all sorts of classes of students in front of me asking for help with their chemistry, biology, and mathematics courses. And I very much enjoyed that. But I also realized quite quickly that I had to make the subject more entertaining and more appealing to those students who were normally not very excited by the subjects that they were taught. And so maybe because I was their same age, I found ways to relate the subject to things that interested them. And also I was going through a similar process of trying to understand the subject, so I would understand better how to go from A to B to C and the steps it would take to understand a certain complex subject. In the end, I very much enjoyed this kind of teaching work, and I stayed at that school for 8 years.
Wow.
And that was an extremely valuable experience also for science communication.
That is really fascinating. I think that the two things that really stand out in what you said was you were able to make it relatable and more interesting, partly because you were the same age or around there, of your students. And then the fact that you had to sort of figure it out for yourself and learn it, and then take, so as part of that process, really taking it apart to understand it. And that was a key to effective science communication. It actually sounds like something that Carl Sagan, a quote that I use a lot when I'm talking to groups, that Carl Sagan sort of explains why he was such a great communicator. It's very much like that, because he was taking apart these concepts so he could teach himself first and then explain it. So really, really interesting. And not only is what your expertise, your PhD and your expertise, and not only is that complex, but it can be challenging given that we're talking about synthetic biology, and that can trigger emotional reactions, fear, discomfort, for example, in some folks. And so how do you communicate with the public or other non-expert stakeholders without sort of freaking them out, so to, so to speak?
Yeah, I think really the first step is to really understand your audience very well, and trying to put yourself in the shoes of your audience. That's very much what I would do with teaching, in a similar way. So that's probably step one. What are the possible emotions that your audience may feel? Trying to understand that, maybe also asking them, because when you have a common understanding of these emotions, you can have a real conversation. Now, maybe I don't know how much of your audience knows what synthetic biology is, and if it would be useful to maybe explain that.
Yes, that would be great.
So synthetic biology is a new phase of biotechnology in which researchers aim to build technologies based on biology. And the interesting thing here is that maybe the term itself already explains it, but it's intuitively quite complicated, because we are mixing two opposites. We are mixing technology on the one hand and biology on the other. And intuitively, these are two separate things. With synthetic biology or engineering biology, we are all of a sudden making a mix of the two. And this can be quite confusing. So I think it's really important to first understand, beyond the emotional level that, and the different emotions this may trigger. It's also important to have a basic understanding of what engineering biology means. And so I usually try to make clear that, first of all, nature itself is full of technologies that have evolved over billions of years. And what's interesting to me and to many of the researchers in this field is that we all of a sudden have a level of understanding of how nature builds these technologies, that we can do something similar, but repurpose them in a way that they can actually serve as solutions for many of the challenges that we have.
Mm-hmm. So explaining just the way you did and tying it to sort of a quality that nature has itself can maybe lower the temperature, maybe lower the emotional temperature right away, because there are misconceptions and misunderstandings about what even, what you're even talking about when you're talking about synthetic biology.
Yeah, I think the word itself might be not directly, may not convey the right message.
Mm-hmm.
Synthetic sounds like it's artificial, like it's very unnatural in a way. Whereas the results from synthetic biology are still, it's still biology. It's not all of a sudden not nature anymore, if you ask me. We can have maybe all sorts of philosophical conversations about this, of course, and I find that very interesting as well. It's intriguing, but from my point of view, and it's my personal perception as a scientist, that with these new technologies to make applications based on biology, we really have an opportunity to build something that is more sustainable, because those technologies, they use processes that are also present in nature. So we don't pollute the environment if we use something that nature is already using itself.
Right. Really interesting. I think, maybe the difference between biotech and life sciences. Maybe, life sciences being something that I think is a much better description. Maybe synthetic biology needs a little bit of a rebranding campaign.
I agree with you. Yeah, there are two ways of looking at it. I understand it from a scientific point of view, in the sense that we really have. I think synthetic biology is a mindset, so it's an attempt to reduce some of the complexity of biology to make it possible to engineer it. If you think about engineering disciplines, they are often standardized. They make use of standard ways of doing things, and this is new for biology. And the only way you can achieve that is if you work with a model that is simple enough to understand. I'm sorry, I think this is a bit too complicated, actually.
No, that's okay. I think that's good context. I want to ask you about, and you can, obviously continue to infuse what you were saying kind of in this next question, for example, which relates to the startup that you've recently joined. And I know our listeners would be interested, about the company's mission and your role and, what you're hoping to achieve as part of this new firm.
So in my new job, I will work as a scientist on creating cellular foie gras. So if you are familiar with the product of foie gras, I believe it's even forbidden in California, because it requires ducks to be forced fed with a lot of butter. Basically, they are on a very high fat diet to make a liver that is in the end becoming very fatty.
Mm-hmm.
And that's turned into a product which is a delicacy here in France. If you a typical French Christmas dinner will always have foie gras on the table. Mm-hmm. But because it's so unethical, there are regions in the world where the import of foie gras is forbidden. Mm-hmm. And I can understand that because it's not a very nice way. I disagree with the process of making this product. But now with these new biotechnologies, we may have an opportunity to no longer use the ducks, but simply use the stem cells that we can find in their eggs to make exactly the same product, but without using any duck.
Interesting. Right. And where sort of are you in the life cycle of the company? Has it recently formed? What kind of timeline are you thinking about? What's the process maybe for moving from that idea to actually coming up with a product that someone could buy?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think at the moment there are about 22 cellular meat-based companies. Mm-hmm. So they're working on different products. And I believe at the moment, nobody really knows when consumers may expect this to be available for them. There is a lot of research that needs to happen before we can grow actual foie gras or any other type of meat product on a scale that is large enough to supply the population. But I hope that within 5 years we can have a first product that might be quite expensive initially, and then hopefully as the scaling up is achieved, the price will be reduced over time.
And as we're talking, just sort of to shift to what's happening in France, right now, what's happening around the world. France is gradually reopening amid COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm wondering, as an expert in both science and communications, how do you think the French government has handled the severe challenges that are associated with the pandemic, and then also kind of how would you describe the French public's level of compliance with any kind of government imposed public health mandates?
So here in France, we had a pretty strict lockdown, maybe because we were close to Italy. Mm-hmm. So when we realized that there were COVID infections, the spread was already severe enough that a lockdown was necessary to make sure that the numbers would be quickly reduced. And the lockdown itself was taken very seriously. There was also fines for people who would not stick to the lockdown. We would need to have a piece of paper actually with a written explanation for why we would need to go out, and the only options that were suitable or like legal for going outside were to go to work or walk your dog, go to do groceries, or go to the pharmacy or the doctor. So that was quite strict, and I think that in most regions this was people complied to these rules. What I appreciated was that the French Minister of Health was a doctor himself. So he could explain really well. He was really well able to translate some of the latest scientific insights into language that would be understandable for a wider audience. And compared to I could see some contrast with the Dutch approach, because in that case the politicians had no scientific background, and they were more relying on the authorities that advised them for this period. So I like the interpretation of the politicians who were directly in charge of making the decisions, and they explained that really well on television.
And were the politicians wearing masks? Were the political leaders wearing masks themselves?
That depended a little bit on the situation. So when they would go outside, yes, but for public speaking in front of for TV interviews, they were often socially distancing.
Great. Yeah, really interesting to see that. And right now, France is, we're talking during the first week of June, and France is pretty much getting back to normal. You were saying earlier offline when we were chatting.
Yeah, it's surprising to me to see how many people are on the street right now. The restaurants just opened. Things look pretty much back to normal. There are about 250 new cases a day, as far as I know. And there is a lot of effort into testing and track and tracing, and that seems to be really effective. So I hope that things will continue in this direction. But it's surprising how active everyone is, and it's almost as if there were no masks, then it's almost like a normal situation.
I want to just shift and ask you, sort of as we wrap up, you're very active in Hello Tomorrow, and I'd love for you to talk about that organization. Listeners who are interested in deep tech or other parts of the organization's mission might be really, would like to hear more about that. And maybe you could talk a little bit about the organization, what it hopes to achieve, and maybe also if listeners were interested in learning more or getting involved themselves, how might they go about doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Hello Tomorrow is a international organization based here in France, but we have hubs in different places in the world. The main goal of Hello Tomorrow is to establish an ecosystem for deep tech. And with deep tech, we refer to innovations that come from the laboratory and that require a lot of support, regulation-wise, communication-wise, investment-wise, to make it to the market. It was started in 2013-14 when we realized that in Europe we lack a coherent ecosystem for promoting these deep tech innovations and making them more visible to a wider audience. So we decided to start a startup challenge to first of all get gather all the European deep tech startups and help science-based startups with the finding of essential people that they would need to be successful.
Mhm.
And that happened in Paris. We had our first annual conference, and from there we exponentially grew. And by now we have almost 5,000 applications worldwide that apply to the Hello Tomorrow Startup Challenge. That gives us actually a very interesting overview of all the different deep tech developments that are ongoing in the world.
Mhm, mhm.
We bring all of those together during our annual summit here in Paris with almost 3,000 people, investors, scientists, startups, corporates. We really try to create a dynamic stakeholder ecosystem where people can meet and help each other.
Really, really interesting. Nadine, are there chapters or is there activity in various US cities?
Yeah, we have been organizing several events in Silicon Valley.
Mhm.
We have an ambassador there, so we're quite active there. Unfortunately for us, since we are heavily working on events, this period has been quite challenging for us. So but we're very much looking into ways to host our events virtually. And so from an international point of view, that's actually great because it's much easier to get people together and to discuss these kind of developments and connect different stakeholders via a virtual platform. So if there's anyone of the listeners who's interested in knowing more about our activities or joining a hub or getting in touch for the startup challenge, then maybe it's best to look at our website. I don't know if you can include a link.
Absolutely.
Then we'd be very happy to get back to them.
Fantastic. Well, Dr. Nadine Bongaerts, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us. Really interesting information. Your work, both currently in synthetic biology, or maybe another term that you or colleagues will come up with, industry people will come up with, but also your explanation about science communication and how you've become such an expert in that area is just really fascinating. So thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thanks a lot for speaking with me.
And listeners, thanks for being with us on this episode of When Science Speaks. I hope you'll be back next time for another episode of When Science Speaks.
This is When Science Speaks, a new web series profiling innovative and interesting people working in science and technical fields, from academia to industry to the nonprofit world. We explore how to be a powerhouse advocate for science and your research, how to advance your career in meaningful ways that make you happy, and how to push back on the ongoing assault on science and other related issues of interest happening in the world.